We'll just let everybody pile on. Hey, Jason.
Hey, how's it
Happy
going,
Tuesday,
Kelvin?
everyone. Everything's going great.
Good, good, good. Got usual suspects. Craig, Mohammed, Jacob, Nathan.
What's up?
What's going on? Sam. All right, lots of note takers. Hopefully, there's not more note takers than people. You know,
Uh,
we want that to happen.
I'm going to give this an extra minute or two as well, so that I'm not always letting note takers in while we're trying to talk.
Well, that's what you're doing. You're letting the note takers in.
Yeah. When when you do that, I get it feels like what is it, John Boy, and like telling everybody get good night, like we're naming off good night, John Boy, good night. So
I think you might be a little older than me, honestly. I'm not sure what that is.
I,
nice.
I know that show.
You feel bad right before class. Way to go.
Sorry about that. I'm only 41, so not quite there.
Hey, I saw reruns. Give me a break, man.
I saw the originals.
Uh, okay.
We'll let a couple more people on and then we'll get started. We have some really exciting stuff today, especially a treat. We got Brian's going to share some amazing stuff, which I'm super excited about. And we're going to tie that all together. But again, it's a real treat with his Irish accent on top of it. Unless you can do like some of the actors that always make me feel bad. Like you ever have like a show or series that you really, really like and they're using a US accent, you think you know the guy. And no, I do not want to hear what he really sounds like.
Yeah, they say the Irish accent is hardest for Americans, or one of the hardest for Americans to pull off.
Really?
Yeah, because my wife is somewhat of like a theater person, thespian, I guess.
Well, I won't insult anybody by trying it. Just a couple more guys and we'll get started. So you know what? I am going to, and forgive me, everyone, if I actually let me hit record. Jason, would you hit record on your end as well?
Got it.
Perfect. Well, we just get two more people joining right now, so just give me one more sec. I believe that's recording, so I didn't hear it, but I just want to let Leon in and a couple others here. All right, if you see me leaning over here at the beginning of class, it's just me letting people in, but I definitely want to get started here. So happy Tuesday, everybody. I am going to jump right in here. Let's just jump right in. Let me find my screen and we will be good to go. All right, so I'm going to start, as I often do, with a super, super quick recap here, just to get us all on the same page. And then, like I said a few moments ago, we have something really, really exciting. I think everybody's going to love it. It's going to tie right in with what we're talking about, but we're all thrilled. We have Brian present. He has some very, very cool stuff. And as we talked about last week, more importantly than cool stuff is it gets results, right? None of this is theory. It's all what we're doing actually in the trenches, and then we're going to tie that down and bring that through semantic separation, applying to it so that you're going to be able to replicate this. So again, very, very exciting. Let's just go through real quick, super fast. So last week we went through Brian's awesome story, right? He took a small piece of what everybody here on this call has learned, everybody in this class, just from a conversation. He applied it, action, right? He took action and he cut the CPAs down by 75%, right? On the ad side, applying just a small amount of everybody here on this call has already learned, right? Brian, we then took his client's offer. We broke that down using semantic separation frameworks and steps that we've all learned, right? Again, it's not theory. It's a strategy that you can apply over and over again. And we applied it to his client's page, came up with a number of very well, we'll just say some tests that should really, really move the needle. We broke down Steve's offer in detail, again, using the semantic separation framework. So again, so far, you've not only gone through and seen the lessons and frameworks, you've seen them actually applied, right? And then we went into actual results. We did a phenomenal deep dive. We got a lot of phenomenal feedback on this on deal making. And it was a marathon, right? I think it went way over 3 hours. I'll just let everybody know up front here. I'm going to have to cut out on time, which still gives us 2 hours. So I'm going to move a little bit quick. I want to make sure we get it. But if you haven't listened to that class, if for some reason you were on it I really highly suggest you go back to it. If you have and you were live, I think that's one, I think all of them are, but I think that's one worthwhile you going back to. So what I'm going to do, we're going to let the fun continue. I am going to start by answering some questions because I didn't have time to do it last time. I promised everyone that I would do that. So I'm just going to jump in. I threw all your questions or most of your questions. I hope I got them all into a doc and I'm going to rattle them off. Then we're going to let Brian show you, break down his ad process, exactly what he does. And what's great about that is not only you're going to hear exactly what Brian does and his thought process behind it, but we're not going to stop there. Like together, Jason, Brian, and I are going to break down this whole process for you. And hopefully we have time even do some of this as a live exercise. And I know I say this all the time, but when we get there, I would love everybody's participation, right? The more we participate, the more we're going to learn and be able to apply it. But I think that, I know that if you apply this, you will be able to walk into any situation, any business, and you do not have to be the ad buyer. You just need to know what actually moves the needle for ads, and we'll get into that. And then if I have time, if not, I'll bring it over to the next class. I actually have a specific, this isn't just like a marketing play. I had to write up for one of our clients, a specific private testing framework, because most media buyers, and I don't want to there, or a lot of media buyers, even really good agencies, don't know a really clean, appropriate way to apply testing and to properly test on the account to move the needle. So I'll share those actual documents. And the same semantic separation frameworks that you've been learning, the exact same can and should be applied to everything you do and can be applied to ads. So with that said, let me just leave this. Let's bring this up so we get that out of the way. And I will just stop my share. I'm going to go through these questions. If for any reason I missed your question or I don't understand your question properly and you're here, just shout out and I'll do my best. So I'm going to go through this really quick. So one question, let me just take a drink here. And again, it's in the doc, so forgive me, I'm just not displaying them. I'm going to make sure everybody understands the question. Reading this live, should the framework focus on high-level strategy, example, prioritize high-impact variables, or dive into tactical details, example of test setups, how to segment audiences? Okay, I'm going to answer that the best I can. I think we may want to reshift that question a little bit. So here's what I'm thinking. First of all, we are always prioritizing high-impact variables, always, right? That's all we're doing here. We're taking that top-down, front-back approach to do this. And we talked about the ripple effect. I also don't want to say that in the context that there is 1, 2, 3, or 4 high-level variables. I think that's a huge mistake, right? Every variable on a page has impact, right? So we do not want to underestimate any variable on a page, right? So going back to your question, what do we focus on? I think if you focus on a top-down approach, the front back, you will absolutely be prioritizing the top variables. And if we go over what I've done in previous classes, what I've done in the past class, I've sort of broken down everything on top of fold. I want to bring this back and remind everybody that I've seen examples where a logo and an ugly logo has made a 20% difference in actual sales, as crazy as that sounds. Now, that isn't what we learned to focus on here, right? We learned to focus on messaging. But I think that this question becomes even more clearly answered if we go back through those site breakdowns from the last class. So what should we focus on? We're going to focus on a top-down approach. We're going to focus on that top-down. We're going to prioritize variables. If you've gone through the framework steps, you can see holes in that top-down. We look at things like, not only what are the variables and break down all those variables, but we went through the steps of what is their role, right? What are they supposed to be accomplishing? Are they accomplishing that, or could we do it better? I think is going to answer that. Now, when you say tactical details, I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to. Now, you do say examples of test setups or how to segment audiences. We're not worried right now when we're going through the framework about test setup, right? I'll show you that when we do the Visiop demo. You can do it in a simpler form a more basic form if you don't have Visiop, but that is not something to worry about. I will also show you, and this is a question that came up before, about segmenting audiences. We can do that on the fly, very, very easily inside of Visiop, meaning you're going to be able to see the results of your test through any segment you want, and it's powerful. But I want to make a comment on that. Let's not miss the forest through the weeds, meaning there can be focus on too nitty gritty and it's going to affect your results. So unless you are definitely I'll show you how to segment. I'll show you how to get information on test segments. I'll tell you how to show you how to maximize all of that, but that's not something you have to focus on. That is not. Focus on the 90-10 or 95-5 or whatever we want to call on, which is everything that we learned here, which is top-down messaging. So that's my answer to that question. If anybody has any feedback or wants any, we can jump in. If not, I'm going to move on quickly so we can get to Brian. Let's see. So this says, let's see. Sorry, I'm just skimming what is there. A problem he's talking about when he's running using other types of split testing software, that they have limitations on what you can do on a landing page. If you, for example, if you want to test a forced VSL that delays populating the rest of the page, it's often impossible unless you either build it directly in the funnel or a coding wizard. That's where having a tech coding support or CRO team comes in handy. Anyway, the other solution is doing split tests. I'm going to jump through this. He wants to hear our thoughts. So I'm going to repeat that question. What he's really talking about here is the limitations on most testing software. What he's talking about is the limitations in the testing software built in most builders. I'm going to give you a really simple answer. That is true. But with VisiOpt, it's not. So in your specific example, and for those that aren't following, what he's talking about there is you can have a video at top of page as one example, and you can set that to a timer with usually a script or code, and that timer at a certain time will display the rest of the page or additional content or just a next button. And things like that become extremely difficult in regarding coders. Again, that will be best displayed during our demo, which I will at VisiOpt, but you don't need coding skills. You don't need a developer. You don't need a coder. You can simply select, in this case, in your example, the video, and drop in. I'll show you what we have is video script as a variable, all with point and click. No need to set up multiple pages, no need for a coder, no need for anything. So bottom line here, for those that didn't follow this question, or if you wrote this question and are asking, I think you're really going to want to show up for the VisiOpt demo, because you will have what we refer to as complete control over the page, and you will never need a designer or a coder to do what you're referring to here or anything else. So really all you're doing is placing one piece of VisiSmart code on the page. It does not affect any of your client servers. It doesn't affect LPs. It doesn't affect page builders. And you're able to test this code in one simple step without any redirects, without any refreshes, without anything that's going to affect any other tracking or the customer experience. So let me look at the next question. Give me one sec, sorry. So this next question is about deal making and talking about here, you've structured deals as 50-50 rev share on the front, 10% on the back. If it's okay, and I don't have the name of the questioner when it's been dropped in here for me, we went in detail in the last class, like I don't remember the time, an hour and a half on that. I am pretty sure that this question regarding deal making and deal structure was answered during the last class. If you don't feel your question was properly answered, just repost inside the group, let me know, and I will absolutely address it either in the group or quickly at the beginning of the next class. Right? We talked about this, and I'm just hitting on these so you recognize your question. I'm not meaning to skip anybody's. I just, for time period purposes, if we've already gone through something, I'm going to skim it. So how do we stand out as a CRO? I think, and tried to answer that also in the last class, and I will, welcome any additional questions or follow-up questions regarding that. Right? Let's see. So this says, just to confirm, if I understood correctly what you said on today's call, after we've gone through the semantic separation process and we have our testing variables prioritized, if we're not using VisiOpt, we just run an A/B test on the most important page elements. Yes, and you'd have to isolate one of those variables at a time. Right? How do we determine how many variables to test at once based upon the amount of traffic? Is there a limit of all the variants you test at once? Well, going back to part one of your question, if you are doing traditional A/B testing, if you're using some basic A/B testing tool, regardless of what anybody tries to tell you, you're not going to test more than one variable at a time, because then you are creating a cluster test. As I've discussed before, you won't know which of those variables you're changing are increasing conversion and which are decreasing conversion. The second part of that question was answered during call 2, right? If you want to know how many variables to test at once, okay? So again, I want to make clear, if you're using a traditional A/B testing tool, the short answer is one variable. If we're talking about BusyOpt, and again, it will be easier for me to dig into this a little bit deeper when we go over that demo as a bonus, which I will readdress this question. Well, then there's a whole different ballgame going on here, because we have tools that allow you to get in and out of tests much quicker, even larger tests. So simple answer is, when we went back to class number 2 and discussed what is and what isn't a test, you need a certain number of eyeballs on a test. That's uniques. And so those are going to range on the extremely low side of 300, average 600 per unique. So if your test is creating, let's just say 5 variations, then you're going to need a total of 15 to 3,000 uniques. How long you're going to be in that test, though, will also be determined by the velocity of conversions. That means how many conversions you're getting and how fast, and the spread of conversions, which specifically means the difference between the control and your version. As I've mentioned several times, if you are getting a 5% difference, you're going to be in that test an awful long time versus getting a 30, 40, 50, or 60% spread. So we'll dive into that when I do the demo. I'm not just strictly a demo. It's going to be weaving in everything that we've discussed during this class, so that you can see it in real time and see what kind of an advantage you can actually get over your competition. You talked about calling winners quickly, noise, trend rate, and keeping the test running for a minimum of days. Okay, he's on. So how about killing a losing test or losing variant quickly? Okay. So first, number of questions built into this, and these are all great questions. And so I hope everybody is benefiting from these questions. So first of all, so calling a test quickly, winners quickly. You're going to want a test to be running usually for 7 days, because noise is day of week, time of day, weather event, like, right? We got a notice here that FedEx is running shutdowns, I guess, because they're held in the Tennessee area. All of these things, everything, political events, etc., will create noise. To offset that, assuming everything else is accurate, and again, I'll show you this during the demo, but you're going to want to run a test for 7 days. A 3-day test is not a test, no matter how quickly somebody wants to get in and out. When I talk about a trend rate, it's not really what I call a trending. What we mean is, if we are running a larger test and version 2 has been winning for 3 days, and then all of a sudden version 6 gets a slew of orders and takes over, we want to be conscious of that. Is that an anomaly? And so if that is, the way you offset that is simply by running the test a little longer, right? Yes, money is attracted to speed, but we've talked about throughout this class the importance of getting real results. Killing the losing test or losing variant quickly to make sure don't lose money. That is also something that you cannot do in most platforms. You do not want to cut too soon, because just like you can make a mistake on the winning side of things and call a winner too early, you can call a loser too early. So it's going to follow those exact same rules. Again, all great questions. Within BusyOpt, we can cut certain losing variations without affecting the test. And when we do that, I'll talk about this in a lot more detail. But again, if we go back to class 2, where I identified a lot of this information, my simple answer here is that you're going to want to make sure, both whether you're calling a winner or cutting a loser, that you're not doing that too soon. We do have methods that we use within BusyOpt so that we can be running a test in profit. Let's see. So another question I'd like to add: what is the most common mistake you see people making when implementing this 5-step semantic separation process? It's going to be a boring answer, but it's a true answer. Number 1 would be not following the research process that we went over in class. When I had mentioned, and we've done like 2 weeks and 2 hours, that is extremely valuable. Assuming, this all ties into that you understand the market, or your client understands the market. Assuming you understand what is making offers work without doing the work. Now, we can do all that much, much quicker than we ever could, but that is the number 1 process. That's the number 1 problem. If you follow that step and then go through the simple semantic separation process, you will be golden. So I hope that answers that. Let me continue down. We addressed testing VSL pages previously. So I'm just going to answer this question really, really fast. So some people have questions. So you come to a VSL, and all the client has on there is a VSL and a headline, or sometimes not. Remember the basic concept, and I could spend way too much time on here, but I want to keep on par. So I want to try to get through the remaining questions in the next 5 minutes. But to answer this question, everything on a page will either increase or decrease conversions. That applies to a VSL page. So if we take top down, Does it have a pre-head? Yes or no? Does it have a headline? Yes or no? Does it have a sub-headline? I've seen those three variables, and I mentioned this, I believe, in one of the last classes, make a difference in a test, just those three variables, of 162% in actual sales on a VSL page. Okay? Will you get that? I don't know, but the point isn't about that. The point is that they affect. So if we continue down on the page, we have a video. How's that video presented? There's usually either a static splash image or a pre-roll. Most people just choose to take whatever's set at the beginning of the VSL as the pre-roll, but that can be tested. You can control with most players. I believe with Vimeo, I believe with Wistia, if it's one of these, where you're seeing behind before they hit play, what's on there, that is testable. You can control what pops up on the hidden button content, right? When it comes up and what's showing. Do we just show a next button, which many times is one? Do we try a different call to action? Do we include that with testimonials, right? There's a lot that can be tested there. There is what, again, I call a benefits box or a teaser box can be down below. That can affect conversions up and down. Can be about the author, especially in certain markets. We've talked about the importance of believability and proof. We can talk about the VSL itself without rewriting it. We can do what I call pre-leads, the part before the lead. And we, using semantic separation, have come up with 10, 12 different pre-lead variations to test on the VSL without affecting the VSL that have huge impact. Can we look at throughout the VSL and see where the drop-off points are? Can test things like bottom thirds and timers, right? I was just on consult call with a really big client the other day, and they're running a ton of traffic in the VSL, and that's going to be their next move, because they are noticing that they are getting a drop-off right before, in this case, people see the offer. They're not rewriting the VSL. We're doing an edit, or they're doing an edit to some 2 or 3 variations of an offer that goes beyond. So again, everything can affect what's going on that page. There is up to like 50 different variables, but I hope that answers this. So this is about emotional bias, and I've talked about this before. So am I correct in understanding that if we find a certain emotional bias is causing a positive effect on revenue per unique, let's say scarcity based, for example, should we test tailoring our whole message and all elements within the page to scarcity, right? If yes, do you just start with the headline? So my short answer is going to be, this requires testing. My second answer is going to be probably not. So what you're talking about there, for example, is scarcity. Scarcity is going to be controlled and placed in certain variables on the page. You're not going to want scarcity in a pre-head, scarcity in a headline, scarcity in paragraph 1, right? Sometimes it's overkill. But let's go back to an example that I had provided previously, and I believe I'm sure I showed the results, where all the client did was take a small amount of what we're talking about, and they broke down, I believe it was, forgive me, I don't have it out right now, 6, 7, 8 different emotions that apply to their audience, and they used that for semantic separation in the headline and got a very large, I'm not going to make a point as to what it was, but it was a good size increase, better than 30% in actual sales. So in my example, the client was testing a headline, right? I don't recall the emotion, but if it is a certain emotion, you absolutely may want to, quote unquote, lean into it, but you have to do it strategically. So taking scarcity, it may very well, and I don't know if I consider scarcity a persuasion tactic, for the record, not an emotion, but assuming you find that you think scarcity works, usually limited in only certain locations, maybe that supports a countdown timer if it's legit, maybe if it's testing something by the CTA, etc. So other emotions, I would lean into other locations on the page, right? But the other thing to keep in mind, yes, that is very, very valuable information. But the reason we want to test is at different points on a page, there are more than one emotion. And I'll also say another thing, another layer to this is, even if you are leaning into the same emotion, there are different ways to dimensionalize that throughout the page. So I just want to, what I would absolutely recommend as a simple recommendation here is, just because you found out that one emotion is working in the headline does not mean that you're just going to lean into it throughout everything on a page. You unfortunately are going to have to test, right? You have to use that data to drive other decisions as you move down the page. Let's go on to the next. I have 2 more, I think, here. So this was a question about, and it's a really good question. that I had talked about during one of the classes, and I will also redo this during the demo. So for here, just bear with me. So I always talk about the fact that if you are not testing to AOV, you're committing malpractice, right? We know why this is. I don't have to lean into this. We want to test for AOV because we can have an increase in conversions, but a drop in AOV, and we can't scale, right? If you're not looking at AOV, you're not taking into consideration everything that takes place throughout the funnel. But the question was, like, when do we use that, and when do we use, earnings per unique? Here's the way I use it. First of all, earnings per unique is just total revenue divided by unique number of users. So step one, if we look at conversion rate. Perfect. What is the highest converting rate option here? Step two, AOV, right? If we have two winners, two things, hypothetically, two variations that beat the control, and one of them has a significant AOV bump, I'm going to go with the one that has the largest AOV. What revenues per unique allows you to do is balance conversion rate and AOV. So for example, if you have a lower conversion rate, is it worth taking into effect that AOV, that higher AOV? And that is where earnings per unique. So AOV and earnings per unique are really, really tied together. It's just, let's just simplify this. It's just another metric to make a decision based upon the company's goals, right? Even though everything we're paying for in traffic is on a CPM basis, ultimately you have a cost per click and an earnings per click, right? So if you have increased conversions and at the same time increased earnings per unique, you're heading all data into the right direction. And this is something inside VisiUp you don't even have to think about. So really, we're finding ways, first and always AOV. Secondly, if that isn't crystal clear, and 9 out of 10 times it is, you can look at, again, earnings per unique. So I hope that answers it. And I promise when we go over the VisiUp demo to show that to you in live action that I think will crystallize it. So when you say spread of conversions, what does that mean, right? And what matters versus having 300 versus 1,000 eyeballs. So what they're asking is, which matters more? And the short answer is both, right? What actually contributes to a statistically significant test, a test that is actually going to hold? And again, I was in VisiUp when I showed this, but I'll say this again, right? We discussed this earlier. We have to have a minimum number of uniques. Consider yourself in a lab, you have a sample size for each variation. The minimum is 300, right? But at the same, so 300 to 1,000 is, sometimes it's going to be even more than that per unique. Then we talked about velocity of conversions, and I know I'm repeating. That is the number of conversions. If we have 300 and have 1 or 2 conversions per variation, we can't make decisions regarding that. So when I say velocity of conversions, some offers are getting hundreds of conversions. Other offers are getting far less. This is going to determine how long you're in a test. And then spread of conversions is the spread between the control and the variation. So all 3 of those come into effect, and I'll demo this inside of VisiOpt, right?
Can I say something real quick?
Yes, I really.
One of my biggest frustrations with testing has been that they don't hold, and it's probably because I haven't waited long enough. Like I'll call it after like 100 uniques or something like that. Per unless if one starts running away from the other one, I'll call it early. But so you're saying I just want to get this clear because is it in every case if you wait long enough that conversion will hold for a longer window of time? Let's say because I know everything gets tired after a while. Promos get tired, people get desensitized to certain things. So I guess like how long will it hold? If you I guess I know it's all relative, but if you do like 300 uniques per.
So let me define. I'm going to ask a question back there because I think there's a couple of questions built in here. First of all, the number of visits is, I just want to back up, and I know this isn't what you're saying, but just for everybody, and then I'm going to ask a question. 100 visits is never enough, even if you think one is taking off. Okay, we talked about that. Just so we know, I don't want anybody here to ever go with their gut because your gut is going to ultimately get you burnt when you go to live. Like everybody starts to celebrate, but absolutely those will flip. And you notice that really, I'll tell you this, I want everybody to apply it, even if their client's only getting a little bit of traffic. But where this becomes super evident is when I look at tests and clients that are getting thousands and thousands of visits per day. Okay, that's when you realize you better not. Like when you start reviewing test after test after test like that, you realize what a mistake that is. Now, we've talked about, and you can get statistical with a lot less traffic, but I just want to make a point on that particular item. If you follow it to statistical significance, and inside VisiUp, that's all calculated for you accurately. I say accurately, not to pick on any other tool, but just some of them aren't, right? But accurately. And you've made sure that you've met what I call the minimal sample size. and that you have enough conversions. Again, I'll make clear because I want to ask you, I want to answer I think you're getting at one other thing different. If we have only 5 conversions per 5 versions, I'm very likely not to make a decision, even if you could still hit statistical significance. Technically, we could technically hit 300-400 visits per unique. We could technically meet the spread. The control only has 1 conversion. Another variation has 6 conversions, and we're going to party, right? The problem is I wouldn't do it. Why wouldn't I do it? Because for the exact same reason that it can flip from uniques, even if we have a 40-50% spread, that's not going to hold. The last part is, so we're talking about those 3 parts, right? Eyeballs, amount of conversions, what I typically call velocity of conversions, is what's going to determine how long you're going to be on the test. If you have somebody that's running a $7 front end offer and is getting 50 orders a day, you have that velocity of conversions. You're going to get in and out. If you have somebody that's not running a lot of traffic and running a VSL, and their VSL is converting at 0.5, right, of a percentage, which can be very profitable, you're going to be in this test for a lot longer. That's just what we're talking. Now, let's answer your question, or what I think your question is, right?
Yeah, and it was probably like 3 different questions, you're right. But I have seen it flip before based on your feedback you gave me one time. You said, no, just let it ride because it could flip. And sure enough, I let it ride for 300 uniques and it just flipped right over.
And patience is better, right? We're all anxious, but if you have a client that isn't getting just the, that's fine. When I talk to clients, and the way I advise everybody here, how do they talk to a client? Number one, never promise, never go make a deal. And I said this previously, we're going to do X amount of tests for you. No, we're going to put all of our experience, all of our knowledge, all of our technology to work for you. And the test will be done when it's fully cooked, right? I would rather have it go an extra week and have what? Failed test. We've learned what didn't work, right? We've gotten data. Than to give a client, hey, look at me. We just got to win. And then they come back to you and wonder, and you get into this battle that we talked about with their media buyer. What the hell is that guy doing over there, right? We want to be the realistic. But you asked something else in there. I don't know if you meant to. You said because we can see offers burn out and flip. That will not happen. Let me back up. I very rarely see, most of the time, offers that, now I'm not saying an offer can't burn out, but I know people that are running millions and millions of dollars worth of traffic. I swear, I'm not making this up in just like the imaginary conversation. I was having a conversation with one of my good friends last night. He had sent me over a Loom to have me take a look at his whole thing, blah, blah, blah. Every time we talk, he feels, because he runs a massive amount of traffic, he feels that, you know, my offer is burning out. And you want to know, over the past 5 years, the offer has not burnt out once. You know what's burnt out? He needs new creative to get that most of the time. That's a whole other discussion that maybe will tie in as to what we're going to be talking about today. My point is, certainly during a test, that's not going to be a flip because an offer is burning out. And the second part of that, I don't know if you even meant to ask, but I think it was a good question. How long will a win continue to be a win? Of course, that's going to depend on the market, but in most markets, it's going to continue. The same core messaging, core emotions are going to continue to win. The second part of that answer is, however, it's why testing is an iterative process and ongoing. It's why your client should not be hiring you to get 2 wins today and say bye-bye. They need to be made clear they're going to want you next week, next year, and the year after, because the market does change. And what are we doing? We're always playing beat that control. We're always trying to continue to win, but that's more of a long-term process and not something that's going to take place during a test. Did that answer all the questions? Was that clear?
Oh yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, that's what I was curious about, how long it's going to hold, and
Cool.
it's just the immense value of offering CRO services. I can see that, just the long-term impact you have on a client in general. So
yeah, I mean, it's just it never ends, right? We have new people entering the marketplace. Things get more and more competitive. Again, I've said this before. If you're not moving forward, you're moving back. So one win isn't enough. It's continual. So I only have two questions here that I think are going to be really quick, and then I'm excited to get this over to Brian. So this was a good question, but I'm going to make it quick. Like, do I pursue CRO opportunity with an existing or past client? I'm asking because I have 2 clients I enjoy working with right now. I'm not sure how open they are to having me. So we discussed this during the last class, and I'm not, when I say this ever, pushing a question off and saying, go look. The short answer there is it is always, and I just want to make this clear for everybody, always better to work with one of your existing clients and to get yourself or move yourself up to a much, much better, stronger position within the company. It's something that we talked about during the last class, called it the Trojan horse method. We'll give Jason trademark rights to that. He's the one who came up with that term. But listen to the last class. My short answer is you are absolutely take your existing clients and make them an offer to do CRO and get them some wins. Absolutely. Then there was a question that was answered, but I'm going to bring it up here as just a last question. And I don't know if it'll come up too much, but I'm still going to, for the benefit of everybody. It was like my client asked me, and I'm summarizing about SEO, and I am not an SEO expert. I prefer by far paid traffic where you put money in the machine and make more money come out. But the short answer is it will not, any testing will absolutely positively not affect negatively whatever you or your clients are doing for SEO. SEO, and I'm simplifying and aging like there, isn't about keyword stuffing or a particular keyword in a particular location. It's really about links. It's really about user experience. And that's a lot of what they're measuring. And above everything else, even if you have an SEO listing, you should be optimizing that for clicks and for sales. I remember, Jerry West, and I don't know who here knows him. He's, oh God, the guy runs like hundreds of servers and SEO, crazy guy in a good way. And I remember him like a decade ago, just talking and getting everybody like down to earth and saying, listen, work on your title, not for like keyword stuffing or putting your keywords in a certain place, but to improve the click-through rate that it's getting. So the short answer there is anything that you do with CRO, by definition, improves the user experience. By definition, when we increase conversions, we increase those metrics that they look at, like time on site and bounce rate and other engagement style metrics. So I hope that answered everybody's question. Feel free to post again. I may not answer them in the group, but I will absolutely collect them and answer them here on our next call. So let me jump in, and without further ado, I want to turn it over to Brian. And we're going to let Brian go, and then this is going to be like an interactive. I think everybody's here is going to love what Brian has to talk about. I'm just going to set you up with one thing before, not set you up, not in a bad way. I'm not going to throw a timer out like our other friend over there. You don't have to email later. I don't know, but everything. If you go back to what I talked about from the very beginning, right, I look at 80% of the results you're going to get on the ad network, and I've said this a million times, are coming from what's on page, right? The 20% is coming from the ad copy. And I've seen some questions, and I mentioned this on the last class, but I just think I want to make this really, really clear to tee up what Brian's going to talk about. We had like a private call this past week, which was awesome. We should have just recorded it. We could have had it on play here. It was really good. And so I thought Woody had really, really good stuff. So, but what's important is the messaging. Anybody here worried about, and I know it's mentioned, and so I am not in any way demeaning the question or whatever. I'm not in any way doing that. The setup, you can watch a YouTube video or go to John Luma, or there's another, he's a really good guy, and just there you can go, he'll show you how to set up this stuff on the site. That is not the issue. The issue and the name of the game, which everybody here should be very, very happy about, is that what is going to happen for your clients and for your offers is 100% within your control. Yes, there are changes that take place on the ad network. Yes, there are buttons, but they're very, very far and few between. In other words, if the ad networks had their way, they're going to take away all those buttons. I mean, that's their ultimate goal. They want you to submit copy. That is ultimately what they want. So I do that to say that what we're going to be talking about now and through the rest of the class is that important. And if you're worried about coming into as a full stack marketer role and want to know, okay, Scott, Brian, Jason, we went through all of the semantic separation, all of these frameworks, but no, you're going to be able to apply. You're going to see Brian's unique approach, and then you're going to see it applied through what you've already learned from semantic separation. It all fits like a perfect glove. And this is what's going to move the needle. And I don't want to take anything away, and then I'll put up from the last call. Brian simply said, let me write some ads, right? At the beginning, I want to restate that story. That's how they got the movement. So they're going to get all their movement from what Brian's doing from them, from the ad side and what he's doing on page. With that, hit it off.
Yes, you're dead right. That's exactly what it was. I wanted to write some ads, and literally that's all I done. I wrote a handful of ads, and we got such a big, huge lift. I didn't even touch the funnel at that stage. We kept everything the same, and it just shows you the power of this. And I'm also studying media buying at the same time as well, and I can 100% agree with everything that you've said there, as well as that difficult part of it is the copy, the media buying stuff and pushing the buttons. I think it's good for us to know, and I think we've got to know more than the media buyer that we hired, because eventually that's what I'll be doing. I'll be having a junior media buyer, and I'll know like the overview of the strategy, so I can manage them, know what's going on, know what to look for. But yeah, really the media buying side of things is, I went in, like I'm doing the media buying right now before even taking an ads course, and still getting results even with, doing everything the wrong way, supposedly. So
can I interrupt there just for 10 seconds? Mm-hmm. Told you the story, I think on the last call. I'll make this one minute less. I met years ago down here in Delray Beach, the Agora at that time had a group that was specifically set up. I think they were a 3-person group for training all the other Agora imprints and running their ads. The woman in charge, who was phenomenal and extremely bright, when she came into that department, they handed her a chair, and she had never, ever touched an ad before. She learned it on YouTube, became within under 6 months their number one of that department, and running all the ads across. I only do that to illustrate pushing buttons is, yes, you're right. You need to know, of course, which button to push or how to set up a simple ad. But what you're going to talk about now, and then we're going to talk about later, is where the money's made.
100%. Will I share my screen? Will that be easier if we have something just because I just made a couple of notes myself? Will that be easier?
Go for it.
Probably will be. Alrighty. All right. So really, the thing is that we're looking at copyright. Can you see the screen, everyone? Yeah.
Yes, yep, you're good.
Yeah, brilliant. So we're looking for a copyright for saturated markets because that's really what we're operating in most markets. Most markets are at level or stage 5 sophistication, and this is the stage where we got to be ready for that. So first thing that I will say is that you don't need to be a killer copywriter to write ads. There's no such thing as killer copy in my view, because a lot of the time when I'm writing copy, I might think it's killer copy. I launch it and then it bombs. So what follows the perfect direct response formula isn't always what translates to conversion. So what I kind of break things down as you've got test-worthy copy and you've got non-test-worthy copy. So what makes something test-worthy? It's test-worthy for me if it's tied to a point of positioning, awareness positioning, or sophistication-based positioning. Once it's tied to that, I think it's testable and ready to go. And then from test-worthy copy, you've got either effective and ineffective copy. It's as simple as that. So with that, like, what is positioning? What's the definition of it? Positioning for me is like getting that balance between market awareness and market sophistication, and testing lots of different angles until you find that right combination. It's like what Collier says, entering the conversation that's already happening in the customer's mind. So with market awareness, if we're looking at that, it's what is the conversation that your audience is having about the problem that your solution helps them solve. And then market sophistication then is our understanding about the solutions that are available to them. So with the ads that I was writing, we went like high market awareness and low sophistication. That was actually the winning combo. So we went like the problem, I should say the point of position that we were targeting was the 9 to 5 job, busy professionals. So high awareness on that, but the lower sophistication we were going in terms of the solution is what was actually working better rather than going more sophisticated on there. And again, you're finding this out by testing. You're finding out where that sweet spot is. So like here's just some examples. So when I took over the account, here's some of the ads that they were running. No time to build wealth. You only need 30 minutes a day. Tired of trading precious time for money. Discover the secret to unlocking passive wealth with 15 minutes a day. Struggling to find time for financial growth. Now, like, what's wrong with that? Is that good copy? Is it bad copy? Like, what do you guys think?
Anyone?
I see it all the time. This is what I see a lot of, different companies running this style of copy. Yep. The problem with it really is that, like, when you read that, like, no time to build wealth, you only need 30 minutes a day, like, right away, like, that's not giving me anything to self-identify with. I can't raise my hand and say, yep, that's me. What it also does is it's also kind of given it's kind of bad impression with your audience. It's almost like it's that 2005 make money online style copy, and you'll see it then in the comments of your ads. You'll see like people like, yeah, BS, scammer, F off. You'll see all that type of stuff in the comment. And it's also like creating a very negative impression with the Facebook platform as well, which is going to like, they're going to almost shadow ban you, which is the problem exactly that we had with this account. Because when I took it over, I didn't really know what I was doing on the ad side. I'm pressing buttons, I'm setting it all up, and every single ad that I launched was getting rejected. I'm like, oh my God, am I making a mess of this? Or it turns out that the account was actually being shadow banned because they were running these type of ads.
Brian, I'll just emphasize on that point, not up there, but I love what you just said. So I just wanted to hit a point. One of the things we do on the research side is exactly the array. We talk about this, like looking at the feedback, and it's shocking how many offer owners don't look at that feedback or will say they're just trolls. They may be, and they're trolls, but they're also an indication as to what your market wants and doesn't want and what they're responding to. Anyways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I say something real quick? Sorry. I want to build up Brian real quick because I have some insight. I'm not going to say exactly who or what, but I know that Brian came along into this company and there were multiple huge names above him, like multiple huge names that everybody would know. And they were doing they're getting like $200 CPAs and stuff. Brian came in and pretty much fixed the problem and just like lifted right up over them. This guy that no one's ever in that company had never really heard of. But I just wanted to say that, this stuff works. It doesn't matter if you're a big name or not. If you know it, and you'll become the trusted source of that company over the big names, just like Brian.
I agree 100%. I'll just also add, like, he didn't realize it. He does it strategically, right? Not ego based. That's why, if everybody's paying attention as we go through, as Brian's talking right now, and as we continue, the strategy is going to enable you to replicate this. But yeah, I agree. It was an awesome move.
Yeah, 100%. Like most of the media buyers before me, what they were really doing was they were throwing spaghetti at a wall, and they'd use that phrase, we just got to keep throwing spaghetti at a wall. And like, we are still throwing spaghetti at a wall, but the difference is that we're strategically throwing spaghetti at a wall. We know what we're writing, why we're writing it, and then the data is coming back, it's telling us what we need to do more of. So very, very, very strategic in what we're doing. That's the big, big, big difference here. So yeah, on the ad side of things, I'll just kind of give you a quick aside there. And when the account was when we were getting the ads blocked, what I had to do was I had to take the ad copy, put it through the software for compliance, which really knew that the copyright down, and get the ad account to get it approved on the ad account. So we start building up that foundation of relevance again. And I was running engagement ads at the same time too. So we're building up this foundation of relevance at the same time too, because some of you guys might find that as well. If you come into an ad account, you may find it difficult to get these ads approved. But what's happening now is after we've done that, we've built up that foundation of relevance through engagement ads. We're getting more comments. We're getting more positive interactions. Facebook is getting feedback that the people we're sending these ads to are actually enjoying it. The more books that you're selling as well also means that Facebook is super serving you. They're giving you, they're putting your offers, towards the eyeballs that you want to see your offer. They're giving you more relevant customers. So
I don't want people to miss. I'm sorry to bring up. I just don't want people to miss what you just said, because what you're saying here is super important. Like, it's just about trust, and what you're saying is they eroded trust, and so likes campaigns, engagement campaigns, and I'll just add one other piece to that, like a boosted campaign where Facebook sees a beginning and an end and can see that as successful, offsets a lot of this, and like you said, resets. It can be used for a lot. We have a big client, exact same thing. CPAs were through the roof. It was the engagement, and it was just, by the way, the engagement can also help conversions, because if you have a longer cycle or trust cycle, it can be played as part of that. But I just want to emphasize what you just said. I don't want people to miss, by having somebody run an engagement campaign, it's very inexpensive, increases conversion and just general awareness. But CPAs finally started going where they need to go. So I just didn't want anybody to miss what you just said there. It's really important.
Yeah, 100%. And what that's given us now, Scott, is it's given us the ability to run more aggressive type copy that we couldn't run before. Now we're not getting into problems where, ads getting rejected, accounts getting shut down. Like, I'm actually seeing this with another client of mine who about, Scott, as well, and they're getting multiple ad accounts shut down, and they're actually saying, like, hey, I think we need to move to Twitter or X, because we're going to keep on running into this problem with Meta. And they think it's a problem with the platform, but it's not a problem with the platform. It's a platform with how you're speaking to your prospects. That's 100% the problem. When you can have more relevant conversations, which meets them at that peak of relevance in the conversation that they're already having in their mind, it's going to help you out big time on the platform.
So Ryan, you and I had talked about this, like, in a broader spectrum, like that most people are misdiagnosing the problem, including your prospects, which we're going to talk about. I just want to hit on that. I'm not going to dive into there. Your problem isn't, going back to what you and I talked about last class, it isn't needing a different style landing page. It's ultimately, what are we talking about? The messaging.
100%, yeah. And Scott, I love that little diagram that you've done after our conversation. That's really helped me map it out in my own mind. So when we talk about like market awareness, market sophistication, with market awareness, we've got the problem, right? And then we've got, what are they misunderstanding about that problem? So what's the real reason behind the problem that they're having? And I'll give you some examples. So the real reason for me is like a force of nature. It's a force of nature. It can be positive or it can be negative. The positive could be, some move that Donald Trump's making that's going to shoot these cryptocurrencies up, or it could be to the negative. And so some examples for my clients was, I was writing for someone who was a tax consultant, and the real reason behind, let's say, middle-class America suffering right now is because of trickle-down economics. And I explained how taxation policies that allowed the middle class to thrive are no longer there. So, the middle class, where one single income earner could cover an entire family and own a home and go on holidays, that middle class in America is gone now because of trickle-down economics. That's an example of it, where before trickle-down economics, it was the rich that paid the bulk of taxes, and it was up to 95% in some cases, or 95% in some cases. And then that switched where, they believe in giving tax breaks to the rich, and then they started taxing the middle class a lot more heavily. So that explains that gives them an education as to why they're having this problem and why it's not going away, which sets up for the solution of, how you can get away with paying as little to no tax.
We're going to dive into this, but if I could put a pin in that, because they're just a little bit. So, and we'll walk them through. So I don't want to trip. I love what you're saying in the example. I'll just give a broader view. If you have a high sophisticated market and a high level of awareness, right? Which we can make the argument, which we will, in the grand of the internet, most. Like, I know you hit sort of a low sophistication, high awareness. The point is, there's very few, we should say, blue oceans. Like, we're all playing in red oceans. How do you break through? And you break through by, they're already aware of the problem, but you have to explain to them, which is what you just did, why what they think is the real problem isn't. Here's your real problem, which then leads to your solution. Just to bring that connection between what you had said, between awareness, the bridge is, how do you get them to believe that what you have is something we've talked about in this class different? It's by giving them the new reason or the real reason. Your problem isn't X, isn't Y, or isn't Z like everybody else is telling you. Your problem is really X. And I'll let you continue. I just wanted to bring that.
Yeah, 100%. When you can nail that, you're now having a conversation with them that no one else is having. And in the trading example, let's say, so with the 9 to 5 angle, the the deeper core here, the real problem here is inflation versus wage growth. Inflation is going one way, it's going up. Wage growth is kind of staying here. And even though they might say, hey, the inflation numbers are coming down, we still know that, hey, they're not coming down at the grocery store. And we know that inflation is only going one way, it's going up. And we know your wage growth is probably just going to stay pretty much the same. So that's kind of countering the whole start a side hustle angle, which is really giving them, now that's giving you kind of reason to present a solution of, you kind of question, is the whole 9 to 5 model broken? Is the whole trading your time for money broken? Is relying on one source of income? Is that model broken? It worked before, but is it broken now because of inflation? And you're sitting with the conversation of, having multiple streams of income. So that's another example of that, deeper core there. I saw one there that I posted in the group, Scott, about water, the electrolytes angle, and it's like, do you think what, I can't remember what they said. It was like, think water's keeping you hydrated? Question mark. Think again. Don't think they really touched on the deeper core in the ad, but like, you can use Perplexity to give you that, and I just used it there, and I found like water alone isn't. Can you see the screen here, the Perplexity screen?
Yep, you're good.
Yep.
You're good.
So it's like you just used AI to give you to find these angles that aren't been taught to us. Like water alone isn't as effective for hydration as electrolyte enhanced beverages, due to the role that electrolytes play in fluid retention and cellular function. So there's multiple conversations you can have based on that alone. You could be talking to sports athletes, you could be talking to people that are on medication and drinking lots of water to try to stay hydrated. There's tons of ways to unpack the conversation based on that alone. So
And I'll just tie that in, right? Just want to tie it all together from everything we've been doing, right? We during our research, we have the list of, and you'll see this as we go, you have the list of objections, right? You have your product. We're creating a bridge. In this case, hypothetically, and I don't know the product, but hypothetically, you're trying to overcome, let's say, maybe the most common objection is, why do I need a special product to stay hydrated? I can just drink water. And so what you're doing is, the real reason you're not hydrated is because water isn't enough. You were taught, you fought this common big misconception. But the point you're making is we could tie that into different objections, different value propositions that we talked about, and come up with, this isn't about your product, your client's product having one. And I promised everybody, we're going to tie all this together, but I just wanted to tie that little bit together. It's awesome, right? The new reason, the new cause that you're actually feeling down and sluggish in there is because drinking eight ounce, I can't even speak, eight ounce, that's a tongue twister, at least for me it is, eight ounce glasses of water isn't enough. Here's why. And I forget, and Jason, you may know, but I forget who to credit this to, but somebody had said, somebody really smart had said that if you explain the problem better than they can explain it themselves, they credit you with the solution. Now,
I think that might be Eugene Schwartz. Well, he does have ads like that where he explains that problem. There's one about talking about your nerves and anxiety and stuff like that, and it opens up with 300 words or something like that of him just describing what that's like, and then goes into this book sale. And selling this book by a doctor who tells you how to get your nerves under control. But I do believe it was probably breakthrough advertising. He said that.
Yeah. It's amazing. It always seems to come back to that, at least with me.
Yeah, it all trickles down from Eugene Schwartz. Honestly, if you look at all the copywriting lineages and whatnot we're from, it seems to start probably there. I know there are people before that, but if you learn from anyone who learned from Gary Halbert, like I have, you came from pretty much like the Eugene Schwartz lineage of copywriters.
Yeah, that's awesome. But yeah, I don't mean to, I just want to tie some of these things in so people can see with these awesome examples what we're talking about. And again, like you said at the beginning, you don't have to have studied Eugene Schwartz to do what Brian's doing here. We'll bring you through, we'll have an exercise. But continue, I apologize, Brian.
No problem. And then you've got the mechanism there that go hand in hand. So the mechanism there is on the sophistication side. So that's where I start off. When I work with a client, the first thing that I'm looking for is, what's that mechanism? I'm looking at if it's a course, I want access to it, I want to dive into it and really find out what's this solution that they're offering, and then how does it tie into a deeper core? That's the first two things that I'm looking at. I think if you've got these two pieces of the puzzle together, you're 80% of the way there with your ads. If you can just break it down to those two simple things, you're 80% of the way there. So I've actually snippeted a section here of it. I don't know who gave it to me or where I got it from, but it was in my G drive, and it was like a summary of Eugene Schwartz's breakthrough advertising. And they said it here, it's like stage 5, how to revive dead products. Your market no longer believes in your advertising, therefore no longer wishes to be aware of your product. And this is where we are at in a lot of cases. So making these bigger, give me 90 days and I'll help you make, 60,000 and da. Those type of offers aren't resonating that much anymore. Maybe they were 5 years ago. They're not working right now because most markets are much more sophisticated. So how do you break through in stage 5? And Eugene Schwartz has it here. He says, you've got to bring your prospect into your ad. You've got to get your prospect identifying with the ad itself, not through desire, but through hand raises. Yes, you're speaking to me in this ad. That's where we're at. So just how I break all this down for my client when I'm starting off, I'm looking at 3 points of positioning to start testing. So the first one that I had was, is the 9 to 5 model broken? The second one was, trading is glorified gambling, because I knew that, based on research, I knew that that was a conversation that the mass market was having. It's like, even if they heard about someone doing well with trading, they'd still say, well, hey, isn't that glorified gambling? And then I went with traditional investments, which was like buy and hold, 401k. Those angles didn't work as well as the other two. So now I'm putting a little bit of spend towards business owners and seeing if that will take off as well. But the 9 to 5 model was working. Trading is glorified gambling. That's working. I've only got 2 ads for each of those, but there's like unlimited ways that I can unpack the conversation.
Separation. That's what you
absolutely.
Yep.
100%, Scott. And you're going to add a little bit more about that and how, you know, you can just come up with endless ideas. But
like, I just point out what you have there is just 3 completely distinct different angles already. Mm-hmm. And what you talked about is we can create within each of these tens, 20, 30 different variations that are going to get completely different results, but they're all based on real solid strategy. And that's the key.
100%, Scott. Like Facebook is telling me what I need to do more of and what I need to do less of. So it's telling me to do less of the stuff around comparing our solution to buy and hold, and do more of the stuff around the awareness around the 9 to 5, not being able to give them financial freedom. We know that that's working, and we know that there is unlimited ways. Every time you change those first 2 lines in your ad, you have a new ad. It's a totally new ad. It's a totally new experience for the person reading the ad. So like, we have just got unlimited ways that we can start unpacking the conversation, and you will be like, the more variables that you're thrown at the control, the quicker you're going to beat it. And the quicker you find the control is by testing all these variables. The quicker you're going to beat it is by throwing more variables at it. And this is the thing with this, is you can't fail, Scott. Like, once you've done this, mapped out all the different points of positioning, mapped out all the different ways into the conversation, it's hard to fail. It's going to be very, very hard to fail.
I just want to put one point so when people hear, because I see this as a mistake, not what you said, but it's a mistake. Mm-hmm. When you're using the words throwing at and throwing up, you're not doing what most agencies are doing. And I'm talking, I see big and small and different people there, is they're throwing a lot of variety of stuff. You're sending it strategically using semantic separation, and then depending on the client's traffic, allowing to test. That is a whole different paradigm, which we'll talk about here. Is it cool if I share first of all, awesome. And I need to tell everybody not to, make his head too big or there. We spoke privately, like for an hour or so there. We should have just hit record. The stuff goes deep, but I definitely want, as we go through the rest of this, for you to then come back to what he just said and how Ryan is approaching it. And remember what a difference is, because super smart, but hopefully we can take some of Ryan's brain and some of what we've done and sort of systematize that, which I think we're going to be able to do, utilizing semantic separation, and get how we all approach ads. And I love that. Also, I want you and Jason, this is interactive, so please jump in at any one time. What I'm going to try to do for everybody, real quick. And I'm skipping through some of this. I just want to give everybody a background in what you just said. I'm going to do this stuff because you did a really good job, really, really quick, right? And I want what we're going to say in a moment to make sense. So you mentioned a couple of things, right? We talked about, and most people on this call have heard of Eugene Schwartz, have seen somewhere, somehow, whether firsthand or other, the market awareness, right? And market awareness, unaware, problem aware, solution aware, product aware, most aware. It's Eugene Schwartz identified, as you've already said, Brian, like these stages that every market goes through. And I'll just pull this over here, and I'm not going to read through all of this because it's not necessary. I want to get to the meat, right? But it's how familiar your audience is with their own problem. So as you know, market awareness, I personally tie to, and you brought this up during your talk just a minute ago, is about their problem. How aware are they that unaware that a problem even exists? All the way. It's not just their individual knowledge, but how deeply they resonate with the challenges they face. Like, this is just sort of, and we don't have to go through this here because it's not enough. We can look at this, and I can get this to people if they really want it in there. I want to make in the next hour as powerful as possible. But what I wanted to say is understanding their level of awareness is just not enough, right? As you just pointed out, it's a piece of the puzzle. However, most of our market, you tell me if you disagree with it, most of our markets are right here. They're product aware, meaning they know. There's very few markets that don't know that there's other products competing to solve their problem, right? That's where we're at there. Just to bring this home, let's go here. Sorry. I apologize if I skipped over something. I may have. Oh, I'm sorry. So then you talked about, I apologize, just super fast. So we talked about market aware, which is the just aware of the problem. So consider market awareness, problem awareness, solution aware. You can see there is, they know that they have a problem, but are unaware of the solution that exists. So I'm just going to summarize this part. This part would be, how aware are they of your competition? How aware are they of their problem? How aware are they of the competition? And I know that you had mentioned in your example that you found that your market awareness was high, as to be expected, right? I think it'd be really hard to find someone that isn't product aware in most of the markets we're playing with. What's interesting, and you're showing from a testing standpoint, is most markets are here. So I understand, and you're just talking about like, how can we test different messages to see what resonates, right? Just because they're in a particular location doesn't mean a message potentially down here, little step down, doesn't open up a broader audience, right? We don't know, it's the combination. But I think that from a market, people understanding what's going on in the marketplace, most people are here. They understand that there are competitive solutions, even in your financial market. Like, they're getting bombarded. The reason potentially we don't know, right? We can all act smart and say we figured it out, and why is because it may be the way you're entering the prospect's mind. That core positioning enables you to come in with a broader, different, remember we talk about different scenario, but we're going to talk about how all this comes together. But I think unless you, Brian, or you, Jason, have anything to add in this here, I don't think it's necessary for us to spend too much time, except tying this back to your talk and lessons, Brian, is that market awareness we can now think of as how aware are they of the problem, solution awareness, how aware are they of the solutions that exist, are you competitive, and we can understand that we're dealing with a very market aware. I mean, they're aware of their they're problem aware at least, and they're aware of competitive solutions. So we're in that scenario. We understand that we're in that scenario, and some people would say, well, right for that market. Not quite easy enough to do, right? As Brian put, it's easy, it's simple, it's not easy, right? It requires strategy, right? So how do we do this? And this is what I've already talked about. Most of our markets are product aware and competitive solutions aware. Like, how can you not be? You type in something or accidentally click an ad, and you now see 20 more ads in that market. I just don't know in today's day and age how you can not be. That's why different is better than good, right? We talked about that. And so we're going to talk about how semantic separation applies. But I want to walk us through, and we're going to do this together. So forgive me and work with me a little bit here, because our goal is to take what Brian did and what works and what we all do, and some of us do intuitively, into a repeatable process. So the first thing that we talked about is the real cause, right? We could call this a number of different things, and I threw this in here I think mainly because I said something during our conversation and Brian liked it. So it told me he was going to steal it. So I was putting it in writing or something. I don't know. I may even got it wrong here. But I think it's important for us to know, right? That the big problem, that misidentifying the real problem, right, is what leads to an opportunity. Everyone is misidentifying what that real problem is, right? It's something that we talked about. I need a new page. I need a new offer. This ad has burnt out. The issue is with Facebook, and as Brian said, let's go to X. That was his, right, where I got that. And your clients are misidentifying what the real problem is as well. Most of the time, and we'll see, maybe we can have a bonus section, we'll see, on, I've talked about in one of the classes, the difference between situations and problems, but that's what most people are identifying with. When you gave those initial examples, Brian, in your ads, and we don't have to bring them up now, they're talking about like the overall general situation. I think that someone may have, and I just glanced at the chat, so forgive me if I'm not giving you credit there, is like it's unspecific, or it's too general, or it's too broad. And that comes from not really talking about that comes from talking about a general situation more than a specific problem. And we could talk about this for the remainder of class, but the truth is, for every situation, there are a bunch of specific problems that make that up. Just keep that in mind. And this is the chart that Brian was talking about. And I'm going to make this make sense, but I just want to walk you through, and let's remember what Brian was talking about, and then we'll walk through how you do it, right? So we have market awareness and market sophistication, something that I'm sure, like I've said, everybody here has heard about, right? And everybody talks in a very, very general sense. Well, you got to write to market awareness. You got to write to market sophistication. You have to enter the conversation in their head. I don't know how, right? Okay, that's really good. Makes sense. But how? And it's why most people get it wrong. So we talked about this. Market awareness is how product aware they are. Market sophistication, right? They're right now, they're product aware. We know that. Market sophistication, general to competitive. I would make the argument, by the way, here that the time of trying to figure out where your market exists, they could be higher, right? They could just be like completely on the other extreme. But in most markets, this is where your market is sitting. Most markets, right? You can, and I don't want to take this in a different direction, you can write different and about a different mechanism and about different problems that opens you up to the less aware, right? Market. When we write, this is a side note that you'll see as we go through this, it is always good if you can make it work to the most unaware, which is what I take your winner to be, meaning not that the market is unaware, but you were able to find through the process a hook, angle, positioning statement, whatever we want to call that, that appealed to a wider unaware, but also appealed to the more aware that are getting hit with all of those ads, right? That's what there. So we come down, and as we go down on the problem side of things, we have what's the real problem that we discussed. And everybody, we're going to work through this and we're going to see this in action. But we talked about this. Not what isn't the situation, what is the real problem? Ryan's example, water, hydration, right? So the problem isn't that, water doesn't, I'm butchering this, but water doesn't hydrate, right? Meaning it's missing something to hydrate in that example for illustrations only. He gave examples, you gave examples to the financial thing, but what's the real problem? Something we're going to be thinking about. The mechanism that will always hold into play. And we're going to show you how to utilize this. So when we combine, and you pass this over a little bit, the real problem with the mechanism, identity, right? How does this problem, how do they see themselves through this problem? I know you, Jason, have talked about this a ton outside of even this conversation. And I just want to stop for a second because we're going to pull this all together. But identity marketing, again, another thing that's sort of thrown around, but not really understood. In this case, we're going to tie the identity into the specific problem. But I don't want to put you on the spot, you may want to talk about that because identity is powerful and missing. And it's part of the formula that Brian used.
Yeah.
It's part of the powerful formula that we're all using.
Interesting from a pain point perspective, talking about identity, because I typically talk about it as identifying as this type of person or that type of person. When you buy something or when you're selling something, you can basically sell a new identity to somebody. You're this, and now you identify as that. You're a world-class trader now. If we're talking about
Aspiration.
like you're sitting around the Thanksgiving. Like one thing I used is for a Black Friday promotion, I said, just imagine you're sitting around the Thanksgiving table and you're looked at basically as the trading genius in your family. Like it was just a little blurb, but that was identification. But here we're talking about identifying with pain points, and this is something I may have not even really thought about before, but it's absolutely true. Consciously, I don't think I've thought about it, but you're talking about identifying with very specific, vivid details of someone's pain points in their life and how that looks vividly. I think that's what we're talking about here. And identifying with certain pains. Like we're not talking about the problem in abstract words here. We're talking about the problem laid out and what does this look like for you specifically.
Yep. And I just want to make a point that what you just said, your example, and I know it was just an off-the-cuff type of example, that also covers a problem, it covers an objection or a fear. You guys know the market much better than me, but they don't want to look dumb. They don't want to look stupid. They may have tried other, I'm making assumptions, trading programs here. Their wife may be saying, oh no, not another one. Right.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
You address that
fighting with their wives
through the new identity. You've covered that objection in a really, really strong way because they can feel that viscerally, right? That is something that's better than saying you're going to win, you're going to get additional trades, just like in a general sense.
That's practical. Those are all practical benefits. We're talking about identity. You're talking about identity benefits, and there's social, and it kind of wraps up with social benefits too. Like, how people are going to react around you is something that's not explored that much, but I agree it overcomes those objections. And in trading, especially, like you said, spouses, they hide these numbers from their spouses and they have hidden bank accounts. And when they lose money, they don't talk about it. They hide stuff. They don't tell them that they just put $5,000 down on some options trading, like some credit spread or something like that. So I mean that's a huge deal, and it dimensionalizes everything when you think in terms of not just practical benefit or practical pain, but identity and social and just going out. So that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. In fact, it's just hope that you can feel the power right there because you don't have to go into everything in a simple sentence. You've hit at their core their identity, who they really want to be and get away. So here, bringing this back here, so we have the real problem that we were talking about. We have a mechanism. We have an identity that's going to be tied to the real problem. And if we top that off with a hook, right, proven hooks, which we can also test, hooks, this thing becomes powerful. So I just want to bring this through. So this funny little picture getting inside the head of your client, of your customer, of your ideal prospect. I've heard this since the beginning of time. And again, it really is difficult to, it's very abstract, right? What does it mean? I think at its key, I think people would realize, and by the way, there's a bot that's going to do a lot of this for you. I still want everybody to understand, strategically think, and be able to do this and make everything we're going to show you better. But that's what we're talking about here. Like, how can you do that, right? And what I mean here, and I'm not, and this is not just going to say, disclaimer, if you're doing this, that's great. We're going to show you a better way to test. So this is not getting inside the head of your market, attention marketers, right? It may be a step up. Some people call it dog whistle ads. Some of those ads work. But if you really want something that's really going to take off and get at them viscerally, believe there's a better way. There's a more effective way to get you to stand out, right? So when I say don't, you take that with a great grain of salt, right? We also, I think in one of your examples, and I don't want to misspeak, but it's like, when we talk about sophistication, I'm just going to pick on, because I don't know this, like get 25 clients a week, right? This week, you're there. Well, that's already like, when we look at that sophistication scale, when we look at offers are out there, that will work to a certain level of buyer. But the question is, how many more of them exist, and how much are you limiting your market? Not saying anything that works doesn't keep working. We picked apart, and I'm sure Steve wouldn't matter because he put it up for review when we talked about this. When we looked at Steve's offer last week, an AI offer, and Jason, you said something like, I think like, and I forget the time frame, but a couple of months ago or whatever amount of time, this thing would have really crushed it. But that's what we're talking about here, right? I don't mean this negatively if you're running that. My saying, so take it with the blind leading the blind, meaning following the funnel hackers, right? We're going to show you a better way, right? It goes down to the idea of how can we be different, better than better. And we talked about this through research. It's just like with Eugene Schwartz, bringing it back to him, right? People would start one of the examples there. You're going to lose 15 pounds this week. And I'm probably butchering, by the way, his example, 100%. So forgive me. But, you're going to lose 20 pounds this week. You're going to lose 25. And it becomes a race eventually to the bottom. And so now we're going to look at how do we deal with more sophisticated markets that aren't going to call BS or hadn't seen 3 of your competitors call and promise to get X number of leads, right? So I'm going to talk about this, and we're going to walk through some of this, and I think it will make sense, and then we're going to workshop some of this. So let's combine the real problem and the dimensionalization of the real problem to tap into the prospect's identity, right? Let's take a look at this. This is just randomly picked. I just randomly picked something, okay? So if we look at weight loss, right? And let's just say what could be, I want to lose 10 pounds is not a problem. It's a situation. I'm overweight and feeling sick and tired, right? Overweight, feeling sick and tired is a situation, is not a problem. So let's just dive down, right? For hormone imbalances, right? Does it feel like your body is working against you, holding on to every calorie no matter how hard you try? For chronic stress, is stress eating away at your progress, turning one bad day into a week of comfort food binges? If the problem is really for sleep, do you wake up more exhausted than when you went to bed, making exercise feel impossible? Misinformation. Every new diet promises results, but after weeks of trying, do you feel more frustrated and hungry than ever? Lack of consistency. Does your motivation fizzle out after a few days, leaving you back at square one, staring at the mirror in defeat, right? Let's look at these, right? These are problems and dimensionalization of the problems. I want to make clear, if you go back to the frameworks we've done, just like we've talked about, and you will see this, for every problem that you come up with has multiple dimensionalizations. I just gave a quick example here. So how does this tie into identity? The ad line, does it feel like your body is working against you, holding on to every calorie no matter how hard you try? How does this tap into their identity? And once we understand the identity, how can we now play with more opening lines to test if this thing? So impact on, it reinforces a sense of betrayal by their own body, making them feel powerless. It affects their self-image as someone who should be in control of their health, but feels outmatched by factors they can't change. They see themselves as a person who works hard, but can't win, leading to frustration and inadequacies. So again, let's just go through a couple more of these, because I don't want to spend too long, but I want you to understand. Is stress eating away at your progress, turning one bad day into a week of comfort binges, right? It's identity, right? They have a struggle with emotional self-control. They start feeling bad about themselves. This is a negative. The problem has a negative impact on identity. If we can tap into that, and by the way, I want to make this clear, you can do the exact same for those that are saying, well, Facebook does, first of all, I believe all these are compliant. They weren't run through a compliance filter, but you could flip every one of these lines on their head, and I'll show you an example with the benefits. You can do the exact opposite of a problem with a benefit and test. So I'll show you that. But what I want you to do is to get an idea here as to how, right? Do you wake up more exhausted than when you went to bed, right? Someone's stuck in a state of perpetual exhaustion, robbing them of the energy, right? These are potential impacts. If we understand how this is really impacting them at a deep level, they might see themselves as someone who's too tired to succeed, right? Inadequacy. So I'm just going to go through. So I just want to read this to you in there, right? Each ad line taps into how the prospect currently sees themselves in relation to the struggle. That's why those lines are powerful. That's why those lines are tapping into the conversations that may be going on inside their head. This is, do we want to say, and I know this isn't available, I mean, we can't do this, but do we want to talk about lose 10 pounds? And by the way, I'll show you where this goes. This is going to be this is like the first line before the more button, and we'll talk about and break down that ad, which is really, really, really powerful. That's where you're entering. You could do this in the image as well, but we're talking about right now, if you're looking at a Facebook ad, but it can be used across platforms, that information that is before the more button, and we'll talk about how powerful that is and how important that is to your ads. But as a general sense, what we're trying to do here is understand what Brian is doing when he's tapping into the core emotion, when he's tapping into what he calls the core positioning as to what's going in. We can see we're tying in the real problem, right? This is a little bit different than taking the real problem for, let's say, hydration, but it's not, right? What is the real problem? And it can be as emotional or non-emotional as you want, but we know emotion sells. And we can do this in a way that they are identifying with, right? Without making somebody feel bad about themselves. So each ad line taps into how the prospect currently sees themselves in relation to their struggle, right? It's highlighting the feeling of powerlessness, inadequacies, or being trapped. But I would argue in a little bit of a more, it's not necessarily subtle wouldn't be the word, but in a different way that may speak to them, right? These lines are designed to resonate emotionally, right? And our solution can be taking what Jason was talking about, can be talking about the aspirational identity. So let's look at this reversed just really quick. You can reverse all of these. And I would argue semantic separation, if you take the specific problem, right? We have a problem. What is the biggest semantic separation? The negative versus the positive. But we're not doing a negative call out. We're talking in a way that they would experience that problem or pain. These are just examples. If we start with the research, if we go through strategically, we're going to find strategic things to test. And we're not testing the situation, we're testing the problem. And if we hit that, we're also not going to usually end up with a ton of trolls and negative feedback, right? Because they can smell a difference between a conversation and an ad, even though they know it's an ad. So let's just look at this. Biggest thing is positive versus negative. So if we take boosted metabolism as the benefit, right? Imagine watching the scale finally move down week after week without giving up the food you like, right? What if that was the opening line? What if you could enjoy meals guilt-free and say goodbye to stress-driven late-night snacking? Yeah, I'm not saying these are the best right now. I understand. I can tell you personally, I have a client in the weight loss market. I can tell you, I'm not going to tell you exactly what they are. This is exactly what's working for them. This is the idea, not the specific, but talking about one specific problem that relates to weight loss that most people aren't even tapping into because they're too interested in trying to prove to them that they can compete with Ozempic or whatever it is, or make a bigger claim. Right? Tired of wasting time with diets and work, follow a plan that's tailored to you, right? What if every small win brings you closer to lasting change, right? We get an idea. And this also is tapping into the opposite side of identity, right? What if you can enjoy meals guilt-free? Well, from overwhelm to control, right? Nurturer of the self, confident decision maker. So bottom line here, I'm going to stop here for 1 second before I go on. I'm going to ask you, Brian, does that make sense? Is there anything that we want to cover there, because I want to make sure that I get that covered properly?
Yeah, Scott, makes perfect sense. I know, you mentioned something there about Ozempic and trying to compete with Ozempic, but here's another way to look at it: is that anything that your competitors are doing is also giving you awareness and leverage to enter the conversation too. So you can position against Ozempic, all of the side effects and the negativities of that as well. So that's another way that you can steal momentum from competitors that are bringing tons of awareness to the market.
Yeah, it's good. Like, yeah, this is not, so there, you're very good, right? Like, how do you tap into, again, we're talking about entering the conversation, right? So there are multiple ways, and what you're talking about is really, really smart, right? So number one, if we don't have an Ozempic in our lives, so to speak, like in your market, right? You want to test that sort of emotional. What are they thinking about? What are they really thinking about? What is there? Again, you mentioned, just to tie in what we just did, the real problem, right? The real problem isn't that I have my situation that I'm overweight and I have 15 pounds. The real problem is that, you know, cravings are out of control and boom. Or when I do this, I can only hold that off for so long. Or, I mean, if we go back to just to like what we did here, right? Or I'm good on my diet for a while, but I just can't keep, you know, consistent. Or I tried 3, 4, 5 different things and they just never really went there. Or maybe my problem is that, you know, I'm doing everything right. I'm just not getting enough sleep, right? It's going to depend on the product. It's going to depend on where you went into. But we're talking about here just to illustrate the real problem. What you also said is, which is smart, and I want to emphasize that, is you can also enter the market based upon what they're reading, thinking, and believing, and use the exact same methods, right? And
I just GPT'd it there, Scott, and there's tons of problems with Ozempic. It causes nausea in 1 out of 5 users, so all of that can be used as well. Find the problems with these solutions that are gaining momentum, you know?
Yep. And so what we're going to do, and we'll see how this goes, and I want some feedback, right? What we'd like to do is to do, we want to ask people here, why don't we write an ad or overall positioning statement if we have time? Well, I want to give this like 15 minutes, and then we'll go on and I want to demonstrate the bot that I built. But I think that what may help this come to life is to talk about and write an ad together. And so everybody here is a customer of Full Stack Marketer. So why don't we start and workshop that and workshop an ad real quick? And so again, I think that we could talk, but is anybody willing to, everyone wants to, like one at a time or whatever? I'd love to know, we could start talking, whether you're a media buyer, whether you are a copywriter or others, but let's start talking about what problems you're facing in the marketplace, and we'll sort of build that out. Does anybody want to?
I'll jump in first, Scott.
What was that?
I said I'll jump in first if you don't mind.
There you go. I can always depend on you. That's awesome. Go ahead.
Not to toot my own horn, but I am a very competent, skilled copywriter, and handing off copy to most media buyers nowadays is, well, just in general, is not always a pleasant experience, especially because a lot of the media buying agencies out there are farming work out. It's white label media buyers. And a lot of times I have no control over what happens to my copy after I've handed it off to the media buyer. And so if the media buyer sucks at their job, it looks bad on me. And I know that that's something that the promise of Full Stack addresses, but that's a huge pain point, always has been, and still remains.
So let me ask you, let's like dig a little bit, and I love that, right? So we could probably talk about 1,000,001, but I love that. So you're handing copy to media buyers. When you say no control, why don't we determine, and like if you're willing to share, like let's dig into that a little bit and tell me what that actually looks like. Like do you have any generic client experiences that you want to talk about? What happens to you in that kind of situation? Both what happens to you maybe specifically from the offer owner? Does it come into, you know, some sort of battle back and forth with blame battle? Do you end up losing your credibility and positioning with the owner? Give me a little bit of additional, like why, what happens. What happens? How does it make you feel? How does it result? Just so we can dig into this a bit.
There's definitely the blame battle. There's also the problem with a lot of media buyers are, so when we're writing copy, sometimes we're writing copy for engagement content, or sometimes we're writing copy for actual direct sales, or sometimes we're writing copy that should go to a warm audience. And a lot of times the targeting, once you hand it off, you have I think that's the biggest pain point, no control over the targeting, no control over how the campaign is set up. And the biggest thing is if you have a client and they are expecting you to stay in your role and expecting someone else to stay in their role. And a lot of times your success relies on the competency of everyone around you. And like I said, a lot of people are just buying hiring wet behind the ears media buyers, or media buyers from India that they hired off of Fiverr. So it's just one of those things where no matter how good your end of it is, if you're not the weakest link, it still looks bad on you.
I'm just going to read out loud because I normally don't look at Marcus says rubber chicken media buyers. I like that. So I like that. So I know I'm like, these sound a little bit like, I'm not trying to be corny with this, but because we already get this, but I think I love what you're saying. It's not unusual. Other people feel it, but how does that, like when you're in that situation, can you tell me how it makes you feel? Like what happens? Because I know from most of our standpoint, I don't want to put words in your mouth, like there's incredible stress frustration. Sometimes it's the worst part of your job because you're just like great at what you do and it just makes you sick. Some people go home like that's more stress than whether your promotion's going to win or lose. Maybe you can just hit on from your own standpoint.
Stressed out, frustrated, helpless is a lot of times how I feel. And the I hate to sound egotistical, but the
No, it's fine.
how is this gonna damage my reputation? I'm not gonna be able to use this as a referral because
No, that's not egotistical at all. That makes sense, right? Your reputation, your business shouldn't be affected by others. And so I'm going to ask you just a couple of things quickly, and I think we've already covered this, but like in the past, you just sort of said that. So how does this affect your business? Well, it affects referrals, right? It affects reputation. Has it affected it in any other way?
It often also affects the client. So if you're working with somebody and you deliver for them and it's really hard to pinpoint. I mean, the blame game thing, and I try not to get into that, but it is difficult to pinpoint why this campaign didn't work. And so it might actually end up hurting the relationship with that particular client. So it's not just future work, it's that particular job. And if you really like a client, you like working with a client, and then you have something totally bomb, now all of a sudden that relationship is also called into question.
Right. And I'm going to put words in your mouth there. So if we run down through this, it's affecting referrals, it's affecting reputation, it affects the client, but it affects your relationship with the client. And let's bottom line this. Ultimately, you build a relationship to build a business. Not that you don't care, not that you're not trying to help, but we're all in business. And so ultimately rubber chicken, I'm stealing it, media buyer, I like it. Rubber chicken media buyers are ultimately, we could say, stealing your money.
Yep. And just to emphasize a little bit, for me, business is all about relationships. And that is one of the biggest things to me is if I have a spoiled relationship, it hurts business. It also just hurts. And so that's a huge thing.
So if I were, I want Ryan in there because we'll start here and we can go through other iterations and things there. But if I were looking at the core positioning statement here, and I am sure, by the way, you are not alone. And I am also sure that if we take media buyers on the other side, and we're talking good media buyers, that they may feel the same way about certain copywriters. Because the one thing I had said, I think in one of the beginning classes, there has been somebody saying that I'm internally ranting. I love it. So that's good though. What we're talking about is like what's going on. I like those comments. Funny or not, they're actually what is going on in your head, right? It may be rage, it may be here. So if we were going to go into, and I'm making this up on the fly, so Jason and Brian may have more clever ways, but if we go through the real reason, right? We understand our market, right? All of you guys fit the bill. You understand and are very sophisticated. You're very aware of the problem. If we go through our little graph, you may not understand or know what the solution to that problem is. So the question comes, and I'm not saying this is the ideal magic, but if we wanted a test going after an ad that was going to resonate with you, everybody and their brother and sister, and I'm not picking on these ads, are going to go, hey, Nathan, here's how you can get 10 more copywriting clients next week, right? And I'm, of course, exaggerating. But if the core positioning statement was something like, are you tired of the rubber chicken media buyers killing your reputation as a copywriter? I'm guessing that a lot of the copywriters in the room would probably at least raise your hand or click the more button to find out more. I am going to guess, again, we have to test everything. So that statements in and around that core positioning of, yes, it tends to fit a copywriting, persuasion thing, them versus us. And then we were to switch to the solution to controlling, use the word control, which I love and I hear over and over. So I would use that to controlling your situation. And this isn't copy, this is just idea, right? Controlling your situation, controlling your life, controlling your outcome is by becoming a full stack marketer, right? And then when there, it sounds like that ties in and would resonate at a deep level.
Yeah. I think that's really good. I would say opening up with the visual of the rubber chicken is hilarious, and I think it would hit. But personally, like where I would go from that is I would expand upon that little tiny lead a little bit, and I would give a very specific example of this, so that it really resonates with people. And then I'd go into the solution being full stack marketer. And literally, like I don't think a lot of people think in lots of structural ways for ads, but I typically think about 1-2 punches like that, to be honest. Like I open up with something, I have a lead, and then I go right into it. I go right into what I'm offering. That's the way I think about it. In this case, that's what it would be. I'd open up with that statement. I would dimensionalize it a little bit with something very, very specific, and then I'd go into here's the solution for that.
Yep. And what we're talking, just to bring this into Brian's and Brian's structures, what we're talking about, just like here, and I love it. I love it, and I agree, and I love that structure. And by the way, we're going to learn, hopefully, if we don't have testing today, I'll tie in a small session on it, because you're going to do an awesome session next time. So I won't take much of it, but I'll just tie into that a little bit so people will not lose out because I don't have a ton of time. But to put your point, this is like what we just workshopped, like the new cause or the real cause. And we do that to resonate. But you're exactly right. All of what you just said can unfold, and be tested. What does that dimensionalization look like, even in your ad, right? How do we word this first sentence, right? And we can test that individually. And I'll give a sneak peek, and most of the media buyers know this already, but that if we're looking at an ad, and I'll give an example again when I go through the testing, when you're looking at specifically here a Facebook ad, you have the first line or sentence, and it's usually, many people will consider that as the headline. You click the more. That will be seen in the ad manager as click-through rate all, which we usually don't care about, but it's a signal to Facebook as to what's resonating with people. So if we are only able, by changing that word, to get more people to click more, to read what you just pointed out, Jason, right? Now you get people in, and you get the right people in, and you're not only dragging them through the right messaging, which I love that formatting. I love it.
The fact that no one else is really saying that either helps a lot. Because like we're saying, different is better than good, but that includes everything. What's the difference between the pain points you're talking about and other pain points? What's the difference in between your deliverables? What's the difference between your mechanism? What's the difference between this and that? But and that's something I think they could last longer as well, in the space. Just have a longer window where it would convert if you're talking about that specifically. Because you just don't see people talking about that. And if that's been your experience, you're gonna resonate with it.
At a deep level, at an emotional level, I'm going to say this, not to their an identity level that we can tie through. I'm just going to read, and again, I normally don't. I'm glad I am. So Craig writes, imagine landing your biggest client ever and having your career ruined, blacklisted from the A list by one rubber chicken hack on Fiverr, right? Before you know it, you're on Fiverr fighting for scraps instead of ranking royalties. That is really, really
That's
good.
really good. I mean, in my case, I would say that, and then I would dimensionalize it a little bit with something even more specific, because that's kind of still a little bit abstract.
Yeah,
so what does that look like in your life? And then I would go into the solution to that.
When we do next, because we're going to have to bring that part of it to next week, when we go over like testing there, I'd love for you to like 10 minutes of what you at least what you just did on like how you take, maybe give you like 4 or 5, let's say, different, what we'll call opening positioning statements. I think what you're talking about is like super, super valuable, because it's not about copying somebody's ad structure. It's about understanding what you're talking about here. Like we have that opening message. How do we, in a small amount of space, lead them through from that being different, entering the conversation, as you were saying, Brian, with that unique positioning statement? So I just want to make a note of that. I think that would be really, really important. And so,
and it's true. I mean, well, that's just how leads work in general in my mind. Like that leads end up, you say something and then you expand upon that in a very vivid way. And that's not just typically for like a problem, or talking about a pain point. That's just all leads in my mind.
Yeah. I love, pardon me. I love it. And so what I hope is, and I just want to bring people back, and I'm going to share a bot. But what I hope is people understand. I'm going to go all the way back because hopefully this will now make more sense. If I can find it here, will be good. Let me just bring this way down so I can find what I wanted to find. Because this may now start to make much more sense. So if you want to duplicate how to enter, and I want it there before the bot, like we want to we don't want any of this to be abstract. It's just a framework or a system, right, that allows every one of our ads, if we were all writing for the same niche, they would all come out different. There are a million different ways we could enter this conversation, right? That's the idea. We're going to want to test, and I'll show you how the framework we provide to the media buyers now, never knew we had to, for testing, so that everybody can use. I just redacted my client stuff. I'll give it to everybody, and I say I'll make it short. But we're coming in understanding product aware and that they're general to competitive, right? Meaning basically, we're in competitive markets, and we're talking about like how can we enter that mind in an emotional way, and we're doing it by identifying the real problem with the mechanism and tying that to identity. And then we could take and play with, and by the way, that's sort of the rubber chicken media buyer, like these little hook type things. That's where that comes in as the secret sauce. And I'm going to give you 100% credit, and hopefully we can get verbal communication if we want to run an ad with rubber chicken media buyer. I love it. It was really good, really good. At least it hit me.
We'll have to give them a royalty.
Yeah, there you go. But that's like the hook, right? That becomes, but I think before you get there, while that can be really, really powerful, by the way, a different hook with the exact same positioning statement, as we all know, can make a difference. So we can test different problems. We can test different ways to dimensionalize the problem. We can test different ways to come in on the mechanism or describe and dimensionalize that. We talked about each problem had multiple identities, and we can test how we weave that in. And then this becomes like the secret sauce. But even if you're worried, oh, I can't come up with, that doesn't matter. If you have this, you can't go wrong. It's a framework and testing process the same way we're using semantic separation. So if you don't mind, what I want to do is come back over here and I want to share a bot that ties into this strategy. And forgive me for a minute, just so I can find out where I'm going with this. See if it'll let me. Does anybody want to share it? Whoops, forgive me. Anybody want to share a URL? No? All right, it's okay, I'll grab one. Whoop. Okay, go right ahead. If you want to tap that into Mohammed, you go, fantastic. We'll take a look at that. Just give me 1 second, I'll grab that. Forgive me, guys. Let's see, did I lose? There we go. Let me see if I can swipe that and we'll pick it up. Sometimes I have to actually enter the HTTPS, so let's go through. So we could like all the bots. Whoops, wrong one, shoot. Forgive me. So I call this pain point bot. I will, yeah, let's do this.
When you pasted in the link, then I don't think you pasted the complete org at the end.
Yeah, I fixed it. Thanks. I appreciate that. So let me just walk you through and show you what this is doing. And it'll just help you think strategically or help you do what we just did and what we just walked through. So if you put the URL in, you're coming up with 20 pain points. It's pulling from the page. We can take that from our research that we did previously. We could do research plus the URL. The whole idea here is that with whatever we do, the more you put in, the better you're going to get out. But the goal here is you get 20 pain points, right? I'm just going to make some random notes. You would be able to go through and edit this, right? You presumably have already done research and have knowledge. So uncertainty about ROI on consulting investments, difficulty finding trustworthy consultants, resistance from internal teams, unclear project timelines. I'm jumping around. Concerns about consultant turnover mid-project, okay? So we're going to just tell this. We could modify, we could proceed, we could focus on a specific. I'm just going to tell it to continue. So I think it's important to understand. So the next step that we're giving here is, and I'll let this go and we'll talk about this, the emotions behind the pain. So for each one of those pains you chose, or all 20, it's going to list the pain point, uncertainty of ROI on consulting investments. It's going to create that as a feature, right? What does that look like as a feature? Financial risk and outcome uncertainty in consulting engagements. What are the emotions? We've talked about emotions throughout this class. We've talked about the power. You will have a lot of this in your research, but this is another point where you can take one pain point and lean into it from various emotions, semantic separation. But we're getting here. What are the emotions that they're feeling? Anxiety. What if this significant investment doesn't pay off? Skepticism, pressure. I need to justify this expense. It goes into deeper causes. The level deeper causes here would be the real cause, right? Consider that interchangeable, right? We have a situation here. I'm uncertain about ROI on consulting investments. That's a situation. The cause of that may be previous failed investments, lack of clear success metrics, difficulty quantifying soft benefits, internal pressure from immediate results, fear of being sold more than needed, right? There are a number of deeper causes. We can dimensionalize all of that, right? Every budget meeting feels like a trial where you're defending an investment with no guaranteed return, lying awake at night, wondering if you're making $1 million mistake, et cetera, et cetera. We're dimensionalizing it here. The identity impact for each dimensionalization, right? So it's going to tie an identity to each dimensionalization. Every budget meeting feels like a trial. They're questioning their competency as a decision maker. They feel like their business judgment is under constant scrutiny, develops a defensive posture in professional relationships, right? For lying awake at night. All we're doing here is breaking down in detail each of the pain points and each of the individual items that we've discussed here that help you come up with, I'll say continue. And there, that help you come up with those core positioning statements that we talked about. This is all of it right here. And if you wanted to lean into 1, 2, or 3 of your pain points, you could do it. So I'm not going to read everything step by step here, but this bot should ties directly into the strategy that we just talked about. I do think it's really important that someone that understands the why and the what we're doing is going to be able to utilize this fantastic data given by the bot in a much more intelligent way. And the whole goal of everything that we talked about today from an ad standpoint, and I don't want to oversimplify the thought process because it was deep that Brian went over, but I want to remind everybody that positioning statement, as Brian calls it, that positioning statement that's that opening line, that hook, the way into the conversation, completely and totally slashed the cost of ads. Now, I'm not saying, and nobody's saying that you're going to be able to go in, but imagine being able to go in and when you're going to recommend 2 or 3 ads on the ad side to support your work, right, as a copywriter, right? There's so many benefits, by the way. I just want to go side there. The benefit is you can start putting yourself in control because you can control or at least lead as to what it's going to be for the ad side. These same things that we're talking about here can be tied in. It should be tied into what you're doing on the writing side and what you're doing on the optimization side. Like all of this fits together like a glove, but I don't want anybody to say, well, like, what do I do with this? Hopefully it's clear, right? You have intelligent, strategic positioning statements to come in on, and you understand why. Instead of like a typical, and I'm not picking on anybody here. So when I say typical media buyer, we'll say nobody here on this call is typical, right? I don't mean that like I'm just talking what the experience is by a lot of clients and others. If you're a media buyer, hopefully it makes you a better media buyer. You're able to come in and enter the conversation in a way that will likely resonate with your audience and be able to test it in an intelligent way. So I'll turn it over to you, Jason. Any thoughts about this or how to use it or anything else that you'd like to add regarding this?
Not in particular, but I'm very impressed with this. I remember you showed me this bot the other day, and I said, "Wow, you're like, should I do anything to it?" I said, "No, I love this bot. I love what you did with it." And you think about things a little differently than I do, which helps me bring things into conscious clarity. Because I know I've helped you a little bit with like your Bondi Pure ads and whatnot. They're doing well, and as you're teaching this, I can see the similarities between your approach and those ads, and taking what I helped you write or what I wrote and gave you in the
Yeah.
sections you started, because you would start with a nice little hook and it would expand, and then it would go into some new things. But like I'm drinking Bondi Pure right now, by the way. But we identified, you and I got together and said, what is really going to resonate with people? What is the one appeal or the problem? And it's hunger, because that's why everybody's taking Ozempic and whatnot, because they're just trying to mitigate hunger or destroy their hunger. Like that's the whole thing. But you don't necessarily see ads about hunger everywhere. You see, lose X amount of weight, X amount of pounds, whatnot. But I think that makes a lot of sense to me, and why you took that and you ran with that on those ads. And then we're talking about hooking with the pain, basically, like with a painful sentence. I've just seen you do it, and now that I'm seeing you explain it, it's all kind of coming together in my mind here. So
I appreciate that. And I also just want to say, as you're talking, and by the way, you were really helpful, but that's a difference between coming in on a weight loss product and coming in on a compliant angle that is real, truthful, by the way. I mean, that, of course, sits at the back of anything we do, differentiates in the marketplace. We use a couple of other related, just to say, like he'll say, like, like cravings, but there's a lot of ways in for that particular item, right? And yet you're very unlikely to run into compliance issues, just as a side note, talking about cutting cravings, right? Than I would if I said, look how this particular drink it and you're going to lose X amount of pounds.
Yeah.
So, and I use that as one example because everybody here is in, I'm sure, I shouldn't say that, but everybody here is in some sort of issue with their clients or they are, meaning they have to tamper or temper what they're doing. And my only note regarding this, so I probably have more than one note, but is that when you come from, or people learn a little bit from the old school marketers, which is great, you have to, I believe, need to take the bigger lessons and learn how to adapt them, and to adapt them into a age of overabundance of ads and ad messages, adapt their genius to the fact that, using Eugene Schwartz, we're in sophisticated markets. Attached to that also, we're in compliance markets. And so if we had to summarize, or I had to summarize, all of this and everything we've done is like the key is being different, but not different for different sake. Different, so you're instantly different, new, not for, again, new sake or different sake, but a way into the conversation, into their head. And I hope that that statement that people have used for a long time now comes into play. Now, I mean, in next week, again, you'll please share and expand upon a little bit, in addition to what you're going to accomplish, if I can impose on you, like how you would expand upon that, because I think it'd be super, super useful. And I think that combined with the way you can look at ads for testing And like specifically, like Nathan, this doesn't specifically answer the question you there, but we've had similar situations recently. I'll just end with this sort of story. The reason I'm going to share what I wrote up is because eventually, and we don't do any of that, and we very rarely work with clients, but we have a big client, they're just like, what's going on? And the account's going up and down and up and down. And we told them, and they're a very big agency and they're well known, and I'm not going to ever call them out. I like the owners and I like the people and I like the media buyers, but they were throwing a ton of stuff randomly at the wall without really the strategic approach. And we had them get rid of all that and narrow it down and play beat the control in the same way I'm talking about here, right? Where you're honing in on the positioning and the emotion and the identity, and then play beat the control. They had something in one of the campaigns, like 83 different ads. Now, I don't want to misspeak here, but I think like we're down to 10 or 12. And then what happens, and this is beyond this class, you can't control which any network is going to send to what ad when you have that many ads, right? So what would happen is we'd have a control that I say, damn, look at this. The unique conversion rate on that particular ad is like 3 times the average. The AOV is through the roof here, and they'd be pausing ads because they were doing what day trading the account. So for anybody here who is either in a position of feeling like you've been fighting with a media buyer, and you know, I don't mean that in a literal sense, but feeling that kind of pressure where your work isn't being appreciated, or more important, let's say, you know, just justified and just, you know, remunerated in your pocket, or all the other, you know, different touch points that you had talked about, Nathan. This is one way in without being a media buyer, right? Like we go back to what Brian did. He wrote a couple of variations with the ad. And so I just think it's really, really important. And I think it's important for anybody to have sort of that structure. So I've seen this. My point is, I may be talking a little bit too much, but I've seen it from the media buying side, really sharp people, but just without structure, the account inevitably goes like this. And I've seen on the other side where writers could really offer some benefit in without having to be the media buyer and still being able to control those outcomes. So
One last thing before, and I apologize, I'm driving through the mountains, so if I cut out, not tracking things properly or not getting accurate attribution is another huge pain point. And I'm sure everybody here that's a copywriter has dealt with that as well. And a lot of times media buyers don't want to let the copywriter even near that stuff.
Well, I'll make a quick comment. You know, there, and I don't mean this to sound like I'm saying putting off to some sort of demo. I'll show you that during VisioOp. That's one of the things that I talked about from the beginning. I'll add to what you said, and this isn't a commercial for VisioOp or a slash on what anybody else is using. Most of the time, even the media buyers don't have a full impact look into really what attribution truly is. Even when they're using some of those so-called more popular tools, I'll show you that, how you can control that data. Because I said this in a previous class, right? It is all about control. We look about 2 things. I'll just give you 2 words that I use all the time. Engineering certainty for yourself and for your clients, and control. And if you don't know those numbers, then you have no control. We had a fairly decent discussion about this, but it goes beyond just asking the media buyer. I'll give you, again, same client, not picking on anybody, but just tell you this. They're looking at numbers, even though they have access to VisioOpt. And on calls, I had to say multiple times, nope, share my screen and show that what they're looking at was incorrect. So one example of that was, let's take an ad. I know this is micro and it doesn't really may not resonate, but like they're shutting off ads, and I'll run a report right in front of everybody and say, yeah, but you're shutting off ads with a CPA of X and a unique conversion rate of X, Y. And so if you don't have that ability to do for your work, the other thing from attribution that we'll look at and show is that this is for everybody. This is for the media buyers in the room. This is for the copywriters. This is for full stack marketers. This is for anybody in any position where they want to lead and get paid to lead. There's something that I'll show you that I call the halo effect. So Brian talked about engagement ads. One of the things that happens is what I refer to the halo effect, and I'll just leave with this. It is kind of an open loop, but we'll show you, is that they were running ads, and I was able to show them that 30%, 30, more sales were eventually coming through the homepage that the media buyer was unable to attribute to ads. That's what you're talking about when you're talking about attribution. All we did was tie it together inside VisioOpt and show them, and instantly they went from struggling to being able to scale. I'm only doing that to pinpoint your pain point. It absolutely is a pain. It's, I would say, a mistake and a pain for many media buyers and agencies, but everybody here wants 2 things. They want engineer certainty for their clients, and they want to control what's going on. And a big part of controlling is understanding the numbers. And I'm just going to put one more thing. You don't have to be a data guy to do that. You just have to be able to look and understand a few basic things. And when we go over the VisioOp demo, that'll be the easiest way for me to show you through a few examples just how easy that is. But that's definitely a pain. And I asked, I don't want to throw there, but I asked, Jason there, and I know clients there, and they sort of get and I don't want to, if I'm wrong, correct me, but like a basic report, but they don't even see many times all of that. It's like, sometimes they're protecting their turf. Sometimes they may not really know the numbers too well, but seeing just a snapshot, even if they're willing to give you, is not good enough. And I can show you why. Like, everybody on this call can dictate, and I don't mean that word necessarily that you're going to be a dictator, but dictate policy from a media side and from a full company strategic side when you can actually back up your ideas and your thoughts with actual numbers. I think that the discussion and the other angle, just to leave this on this, that we had previously about this was in the same way. If you are supplying that copy, how do you know it's really working or not? If you have I'm going to throw this out, Marcus credit, rubber chicken media buyer that is telling the owner or whoever, the CEO, CMO, whoever is in charge over there is telling them that the copy isn't working. When your copy may or probably didn't get a fair shake, like you said, whether it's the wrong audience, whether it's the wrong ads, whether it's the wrong attribution. So really good point. So I'm going to end. I hope this was super helpful. I'm a little bit late to the next call. We're trying to load as much value as possible. I promise, I will include the testing part that I wasn't able to include here. Jason will, because I'm forcing him to do and expand upon what he was talking about with like how to approach the ads. And then I know he has something like really, really special to share for next week. So
Yeah, all sounds great.
yeah, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.